Welcome to our live Indians show. I'm cleveland.com's Joey Morona. The Indians have traded starting pitcher Justin-Masterson to the St. Louis Cardinals for outfielder James Ramsey. We're going to talk about it for the next 20 to 25 minutes or so with beat writers from cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer. Let's bring in cleveland.com's Paul Hoynes. Paul Hoynes, live at Progressive Field. Hoynes, how are you?
Good, Joey. How you doing?
Not too bad. As we mentioned, the Indians have just made this trade, Justin Masterson to the Cardinals for James Ramsey. What was your reaction when you heard about it?
The only thing that surprised me, Joey, is I thought with Masterson being on the DL, it might take a little longer for him to deal him. I thought maybe he would stay on the Indians through the July 31st non-waiver deadline, and then maybe get traded in August. But as far as being traded, I don't think it's a big surprise.
Yeah, as you mentioned, he's been on the DL. How will this move affect the rotation?
Well, I don't think it really affects it too much. Justin, obviously was opening day starter, #1 starter coming out of spring training, but he didn't pitch well. So they finally had to put him on the DL. So I think the rotation is moving past him, obviously. You've got Corey Kluber. They just brought up Danny Salazar. You've got Trevor Bauer. This is definitely a move toward a younger rotation. And Masterson, unfortunately, if it had been the Justin Masterson of 2013, I think the Indians would be in much closer to first place, and he wouldn't have been traded. But he struggled. They made a move, and now the question is, are they still a competitor? I think can you still be compete for the division and the wild card?
Now, as we mentioned that Justin Masterson was on the DL, so he hasn't been pitching for a couple weeks. But what does it do for the depth of this pitching rotation? I mean, with one injury or some bad performances by some of those young guys, the depth of this pitching staff really takes a hit, don't you think?
Well, I think so, but Josh Conlon is down in AAA. So is T.J. House. If anything, with Masterson being on the DL, they've been able to move some parts around. Salazar's come up and pitched very well. So I think the depth is okay unless they lose 2 or 3 guys. So I think they'll be covered. You lose some experience, obviously. You lose some leadership. But as far as pure talent on the mound goes, based on how Justin was pitching this year, I think it's a push. It's a flip of the coin here. I think the Indians had to make this deal. They needed an outfielder. Especially in the upper levels of their minor league. They needed a prospect. They're short there. Ramsey looks like he has some power. It's the #1 pick in 2012. So I think this is probably the best they could do under the circumstances.
Now let's go back to February. Hoynes, the Indians report for spring training. Justin Masterson is your #1 starter at that point. Obviously, he was an all-star in 2013. What went wrong? I know he was hurt. He had that knee. Was that the issue, or what was the issue with Masterson this season?
Joey, that's like the $60 million question. I was talking to him yesterday, and yes, the knee started bothering him. He said it started bothering him the second start of the season. But the biggest mystery is the lost velocity. He did not know. He didn't know where it was. He didn't know what happened to it. And the Indians were aware of that in spring training. I think that played a part in the contract negotiations about a multi-year deal, and why they didn't close the deal on Masterson. And he never really recovered the velocity. And he's only 30 years old, so I don't know if it was he's a big, tall guy, big guy, and with a lot of moving parts in his delivery. I don't know if that was costing him. There was some mechanical flaw that they couldn't find that cost him 3, 4, 5 miles an hour on his fastball. But whatever it was, you know, he was unable to find it and put it back in his delivery. And I think that played a huge part in his struggles this year because he's dead on right-handed. He always has been, even with a decrease in velocity. I think they only hit for 214 against him. But where the velocity comes in, is he couldn't get lefties out. And when he was throwing 94 to 96 miles an hour last year, he was able to neutralize lefties. This year, with that three-quarter motion, lefties saw him. He wasn't throwing as hard, and they hit like 330 against him. So I think that's where the lack of velocity really came into play with Justin.
Now he goes over to the National League, to the Cardinals. Obviously, they believe that he has something left. What do you think he's going to do over there in the NL?
Well, I think they need pitching. Shelby Miller's been struggling. Waka, the guy who had the great postseason for him last year, he's hurt. They've got some injuries, so I think he'll be able to step in there. I think he'll have an advantage for the first. He's a rental player. He'll have an advantage because he's new to the National League, and he has great movement on his pitches. I think he'll be able to survive there, but unless he finds his velocity, I think eventually, National League hitters will catch up. With so much interleague play, it's not like he's a huge mystery pitcher going over there. People know him. But the thing for Justin, he's going into the off season as a free agent, and hopefully he can get healthy or find that velocity, and where he can sign a good contract and be an effective pitcher for somebody next year.
All right, as you mentioned at the top of the show, the Indians have traded Justin Masterson to the St. Louis Cardinals. Hoynes, the Indians are a few games under 500, 3 games under 500, I believe. What does this move mean at the trade deadline mean for them going forward?
Well, I think they're stuck at Joey. They're in that gray area. Are they a contender, or is it time to run the white flag up and start playing the kid, start emptying the farm system? And bringing everybody up. I don't think they're in that. I don't think they're at that stage with the second wild card. You've always got a shot. But I think this is the move they had to make. I don't think this is reflective of their ability to stay competitive in the division or in the wild card. I think it was a business move that they had to make at this point. I would imagine if this was the best return they could get in measuring, in talking to the different teams they talked about. So I think this is more of a business move. It's a move, they didn't want him to walk away for free at the end of the year. They weren't going to make him a qualifying offer, almost assuredly. That's a $15 million commitment, and Masterson could have turned around and taken it. So I don't think they wanted to do that. So as far as moving forward, I think they're still competitive, but the thing that troubles me about the club is, Joey, that they haven't really shown anyone that they're more than a 500 ball club.
All right, Paul Hoynes live from Progressive Field. Thanks, Hoynesy.
Thanks, Joey.
All right, we're going to get in Zack Meisel to get his take on the trade in just a few moments. Justin Masterson, 4-6 with a 5.51 ERA this season. He's been on that DL for a few weeks now with that knee. Was an all-star in 2013, came over to the Indians in 2009 in the Victor Martinez trade. We're going to get Zack Meisel's take. The Indians get James Ramsey, an outfielder, a left-handed hitting outfielder, the #1 pick from the Cardinals just last year, has some power, and the Indians need him, obviously, and need some outfield help. With guys like Ryan Rayburn, David Murphy struggling, and also Michael Bourne on the DL. Let's get Zack Meisel on the line. Zack, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. So, Zack, what was your reaction when you heard the news that Justin Masterson had been traded?
I had maybe like a Corey Kluber-like stoic no reaction whatsoever. I think the Indians, this has been a long, trying season both for Masterson and the Indians. They have really struggled to figure out what is ailing him, why he struggled so much, why he lost his velocity, why he can't command his pitches. And I think, they've thought for a little while now that, especially with the injury he suffered and needing a mental break, I think this has been in the works. They've tried to gauge some interest on him for a while, and they finally got a match with a team who was willing to give up a decent prospect.
Now, coming out of spring training without a deal with Masterson, seems like the Indians have dodged a bullet, not getting the deal done back then in February.
Yeah, the Indians have made some mistakes signing guys to long-term deals before. Travis Hafner didn't pan out. Grady Sizemore did for a little bit, but then, they were paying him a lot of money once the injuries settled in with him. And, Jake Westbrook didn't work. Swisher and Bourne haven't worked how they'd have hoped. So, they definitely did dodge a bullet without question in not signing Masterson. And he's going to hit free agency and probably cost himself a lot of money this year. And I think the Indians are relieved and let him move on somewhere else and kind of be another team's issue for the last 2 months.
Now, we went over this with Hoynes a little bit, but what do you think the impact of Justin Masterson not being in the Indians' rotation, mean for this club going forward?
I think it'll have more of an impact in the clubhouse and off the field. Masterson was always a really even-keeled guy. He's always a guy who's going to have a positive attitude and kind of be laid back, keep things in perspective and kind of easygoing. And, it's nice to have that in the clubhouse, especially when things are going the way they've gone for the Indians the first 4 months. But when it comes to the rotation, look, he has not been the 2013 version of Justin Masterson by any means. And, they were going to have a little dilemma to face when he was supposed to pitch Friday for the Indians coming off a disabled list. And the question would have been, if he continued to pitch as poorly as he had the first 4 months, how long of a leash do you grant him? And do you let him struggle for the last 2 months? Do you move him to the bullpen? Do you put him on the DL, make up an injury? Do you send him down to AAA? There were a lot of questions about how the Indians were going to attack that. Now they don't have to worry about it, but you do wonder because they've kind of shuffled guys in and out of the rotation for the better part of about 2 months now. We've seen TJ House come and go. Danny Salazar come and go and come back again. We've seen Zack McAllister go back and forth between AAA and the big league club. Josh Tomlin has done the same. You're going to have to settle on 5 starting pitchers eventually, and now you have 1 less to choose from with Masterson gone. But I wouldn't be surprised to see the Indians still look for an addition here and try to add another starting pitcher because they don't have a lot of options with AAA. And now, again, you have 1 less to choose from with Masterson gone. So they do have a need in the rotation, and losing Masterson the way he pitched isn't going to hurt, but you do have less depth.
The training deadline comes and goes in about 25 hours from now, 4 o'clock on Thursday. What are you hearing in terms of, will the Indians make another move?
They're definitely open to trading Asdrubal Cabrera. I think it's basically the exact same situation as with Masterson. He's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. He's a guy who Indians probably wouldn't really miss. You can plug in Mike Cavilas, plug in Jose Ramirez at shortstop. You do have Francisco Lindor waiting in the wings, the 20-year-old team's top prospect at AAA, where he's played well for about a week since he was promoted. And look, they want him to get more time at AAA. They don't want to start that arbitration clock and call him up right away. But, there is pressure just because of the way this team is assembled, what they accomplished last year, the contracts that they've given veterans who are going to be here for the next few years. This isn't a rebuilding process. This team is not just selling at the deadline. They're still looking for ways to improve for this year, next year, and beyond. So it wouldn't surprise me if they look to deal Asdrubal Cabrera. And again, they're still looking for a right-handed bat, probably in the outfield. They're still looking for a starting pitcher, and they're not closing up shop. They're not throwing the white flag on the 2014 season, but they are moving parts that they deem unnecessary, and I think Masterson fell into that.
So they're retooling, not rebuilding, as you would put it, right?
Yeah, I think, again, they don't want a rental either. They're not going to go trade for a pitcher or a hitter who's signed only through this season. And that's part of the reason why they are so open to trading Masterson and Cabrera, guys who are going to be free agents anyway. that they probably weren't going to extend a qualifying offer to. They probably weren't going to, they didn't have talks during the season about long-term extensions. So they were out the door to begin with. So they're looking for guys signed through at least 2015.
All right, let's talk about the guy that they got in return, James Ramsey, a former #1 pick of the St. Louis Cardinals. What can you tell us about him?
Well, he went to Florida State, the good college baseball program. He is a little old for where he's been. He was at AA in the Cardinals organization, even though he's 24 years old, and that's not, it's not an end-all, be-all, but he'll report to AAA for the Indians, and it'll be interesting to see how he performs there, because this will be the highest level he's been at. He's had pretty good success, a guy who is hitting 300 this year, but has been about a 260, 270 hitter. He's got a little bit of pop. The Indians have drafted an outfielder in the first round 3 straight years. They took Tyler Naquin, Clint Frazier, now Bradley Zimmer this year. They've got a lot of depth there, and you do wonder if now guys, you can deal from an area of depth and maybe trade one of those guys if you are looking for a pitcher or someone who can help right away. So Ramsey will go to AAA. He'll be one step away from the big league club. You would think. I would doubt he'd get a September call-up this year, but he could be in the mix if he performs well coming into spring training next season.
Yeah, I was going to ask, with Michael Bourne hurting, Ryan Rayburn, David Murphy struggling, could we see Ramsey up here sooner than later?
I think the only way he'd be up here is if this team went south in a hurry. I think he doesn't have a whole lot of experience at AAA. He's played about 1 full season's worth of games at AA. He had some injuries earlier this year, so he's been limited to 67 games. So he isn't very seasoned, and I think you need to want to see him at AAA for a little while before they get a look at him at the big league level.
All right, Zack Meisel, thanks for joining us.
You bet, anytime.
All right, Justin Masterson once again has been traded to the St. Louis Cardinals for outfielder James Ramsey, an outfielder from, as you mentioned, Florida State, former #1 pick of the Cardinals in 2013. We'll get Dennis Manoloff of the Plain Dealer to get his take here momentarily. The Indians take on the Seattle Mariners tonight. Great matchup, Corey Kluber versus Felix Hernandez. So if you're heading down to Progressive Field, that's the matchup to watch. We've got Dennis Manoloff on the line. Dennis, how are you?
J-Mo, what's going on?
Not too much. So the Indians, as you know, have traded Justin Masterson to the Cardinals. I guess the big question, D-Man, is you've watched every pitch, rewatched every pitch, game after game. What went wrong with Justin Masterson this season?
Well, his mechanics fell out of whack, and why that is, there's a lot of opinion on that. Some would say it was because his knee's bothering him, and that's affecting his delivery. Others would say it's just one of those years that Masterson has been susceptible to, because we know his pattern as a starter has been good year, bad year, good year, bad year, and actually it's bad, good, and now this one is bad again. So, he's a big man, 6'6", long arm action, and though that can be hard to keep mechanically sound, and he just hasn't been very good this year.
Yeah, 48 and 61 in his 5+ years with the Indians, 4.23 ERA, but his ERA up to 5.51 this year, 4-6, an All-Star last year. People said he may have lost his velocity, his sinker wasn't sinking. What else can you tell us about the way he pitched this year?
Yeah, well, Masterson has got to have his #1 pitch by far is the sinker ball. And if that two-seam fastball, and if it isn't sinking, if it isn't darting and diving, then he's in big trouble. And he was never able to really get on top of that pitch, and it did flatten out, and it was hit hard. He also has lost velocity. Again, it can be mechanically related. It can also be because of the knee. He's not, able to get the base underneath him that he needs to throw it as hard as he used to. He's always maintained that his arm felt fine, so we kept asking him about that. But for again a number of reasons, he just wasn't very good this year, and that's the Indians were pretty much saying that in the offseason. They were saying to Masterson, show us a second straight good year, and that's why they walked away from the negotiating table on that
potential multi-year contract. They wanted to see back-to-back good years as a starting pitcher, and as it's shown this year, the Indians were proven right. He wasn't able to duplicate and put a second good year together.
Now he goes over to the NL. He's made a couple of rehab starts since being on the DL. What do you think he could do over there in St. Louis?
Well, anytime a guy's struggling as badly as Masterson has this year, there's always a chance that a change of scenery is going to help. All right. Certainly, you go to St. Louis, baseball town. They pack the place. They're in contention. Maybe that helps too. But I honestly don't think that Masterson. I think he would be good regardless of where he played in terms of fan bases. He loved Cleveland, so that wasn't an issue. It's not like he wanted out of here. I mean, he loved playing for the Indians, even if there were 9,000 people in the stands. But again, you go to a new place, you feel kind of a boost of energy, perhaps playing for the Cardinals. You also might have a new set of eyes on his mechanical issue. Maybe there's somebody in St. Louis who spots something that Cleveland people weren't able to spot, and they identify it and they're able to fix it in a short time period. That's possible. You also have a better infield defense for the St. Louis Cardinals than you do for the Cleveland Indians. Much better. And Masterson relies on his infield defense. He relies on the range of his fielders and his fielders' ability to handle ground balls, and because he's a sinker baller. So that'll help, you would think. But it's all going to depend really on whether Masterson is in fact over this knee issue, and also whether somebody in that organization can fix his mechanical problems.
Indians a couple of games under 500. D-Man, was this just a business decision to trade Masterson, or this was an indication of them throwing in the towel or anything like that?
I'm with you on the former, Joe. You worded it correctly. I do believe it was a business decision. I don't believe this is a throw-in-the-towel type of move, okay, for several reasons. Number one, Justin Masterson just hasn't been very good this year, okay? So the Indians are not trading a player who has been helping them win games. That's the most important point to remember. I'm not trying to dump on Masterson. I'm just talking about the reality of the situation. He hasn't been helping them. The same would go if they are able to unload Asdrubal Cabrera. He really hasn't been all that great, all right? So I don't think you're looking at waving the white flag if with the Masterson trade and if you were to trade Cabrera. You also have to remember, too, there's a salary component to this as well. I mean, the Indians, and that's always the case. You always have to look at the financials when you talk about the Indians. They're presumably, I would assume that they're making the Cardinals pick up the rest of this of Masterson's 2014 salary, and if that's the case, you're talking about $4 million on a prorated scale, and with Cabrera, it would be, I think, a little more because he's making $10 million. So if you dump those two guys, you potentially recoup $7 million of their salary. So that there's a component of that as well. But I don't think that in and of itself, the Justin Masterson trade, or if it were to happen, the Cabrera trade, signal that the Indians are quitting on the season.
Now, even without Masterson, the Indians' rotation becomes decidedly younger and a lot less, depth. How will it affect the Indians, starting pitching going forward?
Well, again, that's so. It's difficult to say because, Masterson was only 1 year removed from being an all-star, and he was a critical component on a rotation or in a rotation that made the wild card. So you say, you're getting rid of a veteran leader, but again, you have to mention that veteran leader just wasn't performing this year. So how much is this year's rotation actually going to miss a guy with a ERA north of 5 and with, some injury issues? And I also think that perhaps you may laugh right now, Joey, but I mean, it's possible the Indians are buyers as well as sellers. You know, that can happen, and they might be able to bring in a starting pitcher who they think, you know, can help them in the final 2 months of the year at a reasonable price. And, you know, so that maybe they fill the void that way. Because, I don't think this is the signal that the Indians are bagging this season and that they're, you know, waving the white flag. As far as how they replace them, again, they're going to deal with the guys they have now, but I still think there's a possibility they could acquire somebody.
What do you think that price would be for a quality starting pitcher that you mentioned that they might try to get, you know, at the deadline here?
Well, yeah, that depends. You know, it depends on the team you're dealing with. It depends on the price tag of the pitcher you're trying to get. You know, I know they're not in. I mean, I would find it impossible to believe that the Indians would be in the sweepstakes, for example, for John Lester or John Lackey. But, you know, I'm thinking about some other teams that are clearly out of it, who might have a starting pitcher that they're willing to flip. Package the Indians put together. But I would hope that their farm system is viewed better than it was a few years ago, because they have added pieces over the last couple of years.
All right, last question before we let you go, D-Man. 24 hours from now, are we talking about him as Drupal Cabrera trade?
I want to say yes, but I'm wondering if he could also be one of those waiver deals, August deals. So let me say yes, we are. I'll make the bold prediction and say in 24 hours, yes, we are talking about a Drupal trade. Not going to guarantee it, but if you put me on the spot, I say 51-49, yes.
All right, then we'll talk to you then. Thanks, D-Man.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, so that's going to do it for us from cleveland.com. That's going to do it for our background here. Justin Masterson, he's the second player on our cleveland.com backgrounds to have been traded. So if you want to be traded, just get on our background. So now we've got the key tower. So, all right, that'll do it for us. We'll see you next time.